This is just the beginning.
Hello, and welcome to Autonomous and Electric Vehicles After Coronavirus virtual event. I'm Joanne Muller, transportation correspondent at Axios, and I'm coming to you from my home in Detroit, Michigan. Thank you to Cruise for making this conversation on mobility in America possible. And welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and on Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, we will unpack autonomous and electric vehicles' role in the future of safe transportation and their potential for social good. Our first guest today is the US Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
Well, I know it's a busy week and there's been a lot of talk about climate issues, so let's just dive in. President Biden wants to spend $174 billion to boost electric vehicles. I'm wondering how much of that money would go to consumers to encourage them to trade in their gasoline car to get an electric vehicle, and how much would go to corporations to encourage the manufacturing of electric vehicles?
Well, certainly part of what we have to do is make electric vehicles more affordable for consumers. Electric vehicles can't be a luxury item if we really want to recognize that they're the future of car transportation and critically position the US to be leading the world in manufacturing them with American workers with access to union jobs. So that does mean taking action to make sure that they are more affordable as that technology goes to the largest possible scale. But what we found is that while electric vehicles are getting closer and closer to being the same or even cheaper if you account for the fuel savings, that's still not enough for consumers or families who are worried about whether they can get to where they need to go, what's called range anxiety. Now, look, a lot of the cars going onto the market now can go 200, 300, 400 miles on a charge, but we like to take our road trips, and especially for rural areas or more spread out areas, there's still what's called range anxiety if you don't know if you can charge. That's why the funding that's contemplated here, yes, it includes ways to make sure that it's more affordable for consumers, but also deploying a national network of 500,000 charging stations so that we can really answer any of those concerns that might be the last thing holding somebody back from buying an electric vehicle.
Well, so let's start with the charging stations. You want to build, I believe, 500,000 around the country. But the question is, should the taxpayers fund that if not everyone's going to be driving an electric car immediately?
Well, so the idea here is to use federal investment to kickstart the development of these charging stations. We don't envision them as all being purchased, owned, and operated by the federal government. But we do know that we have to make some what I would call market-making investments to really help deploy these at scale and to get them out across different kinds of communities and areas, because there are some where we still don't have the density of electric vehicles in rural areas or along highways. But we're starting to be able to better and better map out where we most need these charging resources. In fact, this week, our Federal Highway Administration put out the latest round of information on the alternative fuel corridors that were designated as part of what it'll take to really get these from being not just a bunch of dots on a map, but a true national network. And we just don't think that'll happen without federal support.
Okay, and you also talked about the consumer incentives, trying to make these vehicles more affordable. There have been some federal tax credits, $7,500. But there's been a cap on those. And essentially they've helped to, subsidize the purchase of EVs by people who might have been early adopters anyways and might have purchased that. So the question is, would you extend those or increase the amount to make that EV purchase affordable to people like you and me?
Well, the tax credits, the original program, certainly had a big impact in driving the adoption of these technologies and helping that U.S.-based industry pick up. But as we look to the future, again, this can't be a luxury item. Indeed, it's often those who are under the most pressure in terms of their family transportation budget who have the most to gain by the fuel savings that are going to come about. So as we get into more detail in the policy design about how to deploy these funds, it's absolutely going to be done in a way that's really for everybody, not just for a few. After all, the vision is for this to very much be the future of how our cars work writ large.
How much support are you seeing in Congress so far for these kinds of incentives?
Well, there's certainly a lot of interest, but I also find that a lot of members, I still have to have conversations about just how far along the technology is. I got a question recently from someone who I don't think was familiar with the way that pickup trucks and those kinds of light-duty SUVs were evolving. Was still picturing, I think, maybe the small car for getting around a dense urban area. That's part of the EV story, but so are these pickup trucks coming online. And this isn't just about these new startups. It's also about Detroit stepping up and really making clear that they envision this as the future too. I'm talking to some rural members of Congress who are skeptical, which is why I need to make sure they understand that it's actually in their areas where people rely on vehicles the most, where they drive the longest distances and therefore spend the greatest amount of money on things like fuel. It's in areas like that we actually could have the most to gain. So we're definitely continuing to communicate the economic potential as well as the climate potential of this. But find that it's not that tough to convince Congress that we need to make big investments in infrastructure. We just got to make sure we convey why it's important that we have an expanded view of infrastructure that isn't just building it the way we would have built it in, say, 1950.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, I know the government, the federal government, has also talked about electrifying the fleet of government vehicles, which I think is something like 650,000 vehicles. But the first contract that was awarded for postal trucks had very little in the way of electric powertrains. I'm wondering if you're open to rethinking that contract to really accelerate EV development.
Well, the president is very clear that we should be using the purchasing power and frankly, just the example setting power of the federal government to help walk the talk and to help grow these kinds of markets. And so, there are obviously layers of complication around any individual procurement, but the president's executive order and some of the authorities that we think could come in future legislation will make it easier for us to lead by example and eventually capture for taxpayers those fuel savings. I know we're certainly looking into it, even just in terms of the fleet that we here at the Department of Transportation are responsible for. But there are much bigger fleets in terms of, as you mentioned, the Postal Service, DOD, and a lot of other places. And this really is a whole of government effort and approach.
Now, I know that electric vehicles are simpler and they don't require as many parts, and therefore there's not as many workers needed to assemble them. And so if I were an auto worker who'd spent her entire life building engines or transmissions, I might be worried about what's happening right now. Where are the jobs in this plan, and how will you retrain or help to retrain the workers?
Well, this plan will generate millions of jobs. And one of the most important things to understand about the job creation here is that we're talking primarily about blue collar jobs, not jobs that demand a college degree in order to do them. Many of those are in the auto sector. And yes, one thing about electric cars is they don't break down as much and require as much maintenance. On the other hand, there are areas where we're just at the very beginning of building a domestic industry like battery production, something that's very important for us to grow, frankly, for security as well as economic reasons right here on American soil. It's why you're going to see a lot about supply chains, a lot about Buy America provisions. The president has made it clear that all of us, all of our departments need to look at how to make sure that more of what we fund, for example, in my department, we're thinking about things like when we're helping communities buy vehicles for transit, that all of that is driven through a focus on buying America and creating those American jobs. There's tons of job creation ahead. Yes, the technology is changing. Some of the specifics are going to be changing, and American workers have always shown a remarkable ability to adapt. But these are not all newfangled futuristic jobs that we're talking about. If you just think about everything from the building retrofits to the fiber we're going to have to lay down to the work that's going to have to go into creating the kind of rail infrastructure that we believe Americans deserve. We're talking about putting to work professions that we understand very well today. Union carpenters and electrical workers and insulators and glaziers and painters and pipe fitters. Kinds of people who are good at making things are going to do very well in a future where we're properly investing in infrastructure in this country.
Okay. Well, in the very few minutes we have left, I just wanted to touch briefly on autonomous vehicles, because I know there's a lot of interest in, among our viewers in that. Specifically, there have been some crashes recently with Tesla's autopilot system, and a fair bit of controversy about their rollout of so-called full self-driving software that's still in development. I'm wondering how the DOT will deal with those issues.
Well, the main reason that the DOT exists is safety, and that's our top priority. Now, the truth is technology has been developing maybe faster than policy in this regard. We've got a lot of very detailed authorities for regulating where a mirror ought to go. They don't even contemplate a scenario where we're talking about sensors doing the work that mirrors or human beings used to. But these are technologies that are still being developed. I do want to emphasize that right now, no matter how sophisticated the technology in a car, we expect and require the presence of an attentive driver behind the wheel. Technologies exist to assist drivers, but in the vehicles available today, not to replace them.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're just about out of time, so I have so many more questions, but unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap up. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again, because there's so many good issues to cover.
I'd love to.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Sure thing.
And next up, we have a View from the Top segment with Axios co-founder and CEO, Jim Vandehei.
Thank you so much, Joanne. It's now my pleasure to bring you a conversation with Dan Ammann, who is the CEO of Cruise. Dan's joining us from Michigan. How are you doing, Dan?
Doing great. Great to be here.
Everyone's tuning in to talk about autonomous vehicles, autonomous technology. Give me the state of things at Cruise. Like, what are the coolest things you guys are working on? What are you most excited about?
Well, it's been several years of hard work on the R&D front, getting the technology to the point where we can actually go fully driverless and do that safely in an urban environment like San Francisco. We actually hit that milestone late last year in November. We began our first fully driverless testing on the streets of San Francisco, and that really marks the beginning of the move of self-driving technology out of the R&D lab and onto the streets of the world. And we're moving into the early stages of building a commercial product now that will be available for people to use. So huge progress over the last couple of years, and really exciting to be at the point where we're moving this technology into the hands of users over the next year or so.
And when do you see that next big burst, right? A lot of people working on the problem, a lot of the infrastructure technology starting to work itself out. When is this going to become like a mass phenomenon?
Well, I think we've taken this, like I said, this first big step, into fully driverless testing. And I think things can start to scale up pretty rapidly, from here over the next couple of years. You'll see this, turn into a real consumer product that people can use every day. Obviously, our goal is to make transportation safer, better, and more affordable for everybody. That will only have the impact we really want to have if we're able to do that at a really big scale. So that's the goal, and I think we're getting pretty close to that point.
What are the next big obstacles to clear? Is it more on the car side or more on the infrastructure that requires obviously regulation and technology around it? How do you think about the next big hurdles?
Well, the next big hurdle is obviously safely deploying the technology at large scale. One of the things that Cruise that we're doing that's unique is we have a purpose-built vehicle, the Cruise Origin, that we've developed for both rideshare and for delivery applications. And that is going to allow us, through our partnership with General Motors and Honda, who we've developed that vehicle together with, to not actually put a vehicle on the road, but to put thousands and then tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands of these vehicles on the road, because that's the only way that we'll have the very large scale positive impact that we want to have.
In the middle of Earth Week, a lot of talk about sustainability. One of the reasons people get so excited about autonomous technology is helping with the climate, helping with sustainability. How do you think about that? Running a big company, it's in the middle of all of this. How do you think about sustainability?
Well, I think the self-driving technology has the opportunity to have a huge positive impact on sustainability and, frankly, on our cities all around the world. And just in addition to sustainability, also in terms of just accessibility and affordability of transportation, making our streets safer and enabling everybody to get around. One of the foundational beliefs we've had from the beginning at Cruise is if we're going to redefine the future of transportation, we should be doing that in an all-encompassing way. All of our vehicles have been all electric from the very beginning. We run our fleet today on 100% renewable energy. And we're actually moving towards becoming a carbon negative company over time here. So from an energy point of view, this is a big part of the transformation of the vehicle fleet. It's the fastest way to get electric miles out there on the road through a high utilization fleet. And so we believe we will have a huge positive impact from that perspective, but also making transportation that's easily shared will reduce congestion on our roads. We'll obviously be reducing the number of accidents and fatalities that happen on the streets. Will be much safer mode of transport than what's happening out there today. So when you step back and think about the overall impact self-driving can have on our cities and on the planet and on people's lives, there's just huge positives all around.
The coronavirus obviously has rattled almost every aspect of everyone's life. How has it affected Cruise and like how you guys do business and sort of how you think about even running the business?
Yeah, it's a really great question. Early on during the pandemic, we pulled our fleet off the streets of San Francisco, and after a few weeks of that, we started to think about, well, how can we help? How can we help the city? How can we capitalize on everything that we have in our fleet to make a positive impact? And so we struck up a partnership, or really a dialogue to begin with the SF-Marin Food Bank and a couple other organizations in San Francisco, and had the idea of perhaps using our fleet to help out, to help deliver meals to people in need in the city. And that began as a very small scale initiative with a couple of the food banks and other organizations in the city, and then really ballooned into a much bigger thing than we'd ever imagined it could be. And we've now delivered over 1 million meals to people in need in the city of San Francisco during COVID. And so even though we're still a pre-commercial company, the ability to have that impact at this early stage got us to really think about the broader impact this technology can have going forward. And that's why we've decided to pledge 1% of our fleet in the future to helping the community, to community service. And we will do that in every city that we deploy, every location that we deploy. And it's actually really exciting to have the opportunity at such an early stage in the deployment of a technology like this to build in social impact and to build in helping our community into the company's DNA from the very beginning. And I think this journey that we went through during COVID and delivering all these meals to people in need is really the thing that got us to think about this on a much bigger scale and to build it into the company going forward. And that's why we're announcing today that we'll be pledging 1% of our fleet in service of the community going forward everywhere that we operate.
That's fascinating. Did the city have to loosen up regulations or do anything to allow you to be able to do what you wanted to do in San Francisco, or had everything already been in place?
Well, we worked closely with the city, obviously, and with different stakeholders as to why we felt that we could, make a positive contribution here. And so we did this with the support of all the relevant folks and everybody on board. And like I said, it started relatively small, but the demand was there and the need was there to really scale this up. And I know it's something that hundreds and hundreds of people inside of Cruise now have contributed to and worked on, and everybody's just incredibly proud of the ability to make this kind of contribution to the city during such a challenging time.
It's a very cool program. Dan, we really appreciate appreciate this conversation, appreciate Cruz making the broader conversation possible, and congratulations on the new target and the inspiration from what happened in San Francisco.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and over to you, Erica.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Erica Pandy, a business reporter at Axios, and I'm excited to welcome our final guest today, Tanis Crosby, who is the executive director of the San Francisco-Marin Food Bank. Welcome, Tanis, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Erica. Nice to be here.
So start by painting a picture for me. What has it been like to lead a food bank during this deadly pandemic?
Well, let's go back to what it was like pre-pandemic. And that is that 1 in 5 of our neighbors here in San Francisco and Marin were facing hunger. So we already knew that hunger was a huge issue and that not everyone was experiencing hunger equitably. That really we want to be very clear about the fact that our communities of color, that those who need access most often don't get the service. So San Francisco-Marin Food Bank is squarely focused on ending hunger. The pandemic hit and our world changed overnight. That need surged. The need that already existed skyrocketed. Whereas previously we were serving upwards of 32,000 households a week, it surged to almost 60,000. We couldn't meet the community need without the support of the community. And that's where great partners like Cruz come in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that next. I mean, you don't think of autonomous vehicles and food banks in the same sentence often. What do the two have to do with each other?
Well, it was a core part of thinking differently about how we could deliver on that critical need. So again, overnight, the need surges. We had to lift up new programs, think about how we were going to deliver services in new ways really quickly. So we were really, really grateful that Cruz was one of those partners that came to us and asked, how can we help? So linking autonomous vehicles with the delivery of food. And so one of the programs that was so pivotal in making real for our community was our home delivered grocery program. Previously, before the pandemic, we were helping about 200 households a week. As a result of the pandemic, that surged to upwards of 12,000 households a week. And Cruz was a key part in delivering groceries to our neighbors in need.
And Tanis, being in San Francisco is a super unique experience because you're right in the center of a lot of these crises like hunger, like homelessness, but there's all this tech innovation going on as well, Cruz being one example that you mentioned. Are there other types of technological innovations that you're working on or working with at the food bank to improve access or improve, quality?
Absolutely. So first of all, we're really clear on the data and really looking at equity-centered data to be clear about who are we not yet reaching and where do we need to focus our efforts? Because again, we're serving 55,000 households a week or more, double the need and double the reach pre-pandemic. So we want to make sure that we're working smart and that we're working in clear partnership with our community. And part of that home delivered grocery program that I spoke of, we have thousands of volunteers and they use an app to help get them to where they need to make sure those groceries go. So all these kinds of tools are being leveraged to make sure that we are serving the community in new ways, leveraging innovation to move faster. But I want to be very clear here. It was a partnership that was centered on alignment of values and purpose to make sure that we could lift up this work. So we're really grateful and optimistic about what change is possible when you move fast, and when you move fast, centered on community need.
And tell me a little bit more about sort of the engagement within the community. Like, you've got volunteers coming in. It seems like companies are engaged as well. Is that a part of your success as well?
Absolutely. And one thing that the community is really getting behind is a clear understanding that there is no vaccine for hunger. That long after this pandemic surge, perhaps we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. Perhaps we can envision a day where we all can be together and not wear masks. But the reality is the impact of this pandemic will be felt for a very long time to come. The San Francisco-Marin Food Bank is squarely focused on our mission of ending hunger. And while there may not be a vaccine for hunger, we bring the community together to solve that, to work on changing the rules, on engaging the community, and making sure we are delivering food to our neighbors in need. So we rely on the community. And fortunately, the community has responded because the community knows if they've got an hour to give, if they've got $1 to give, we're going to turn that dollar into 2 meals. We're going to turn that hour into the delivery of food to our neighbors in need. We're coming together to work on solving this problem in a big, bold way.
I don't always think of nonprofits as tech-forward organizations, but clearly yours is. What would you say to other food bank executive directors or executive directors at other nonprofits who are wary about embracing new tech like AVs or like apps?
Well, it's been working with partners like Cruise. I mean, working in close partnership with a leading edge company that's coming forth and also asking the question differently. Because the question was, how can we solve this problem together? How can we leverage technology to think differently about how we deliver service at scale? So my advice would be, number one, be open to the question. But number two, be really centered on for what purpose and what outcome do we want to leverage this technology? Because we were squarely focused on equity and community. And that's why we're getting the big result, because we're delivering, because of this partnership, we are delivering groceries to people with mobility concerns, to people who would otherwise not be able to access service. So it's not just about using technology, it's about leveraging it to drive change. And that's the result we are achieving.
And before we run out of time, I got a really interesting question come in from one of our readers who's watching now. This is from Austin, Texas. The reader wants to know, how has the pandemic impacted the adoption trends of these new mobility offerings like autonomous and electric vehicles? And I'd love your own experience on that.
I think it's accelerating it. I mean, we're seeing, for example, a greater openness. But we're also seeing a desire to move faster. So certainly within our culture here at the San Francisco-Marin Food Bank, we are just open to trying new things. The pandemic has made it possible to create wholly new ways of work, to reach hundreds of thousands of more people in a very short amount of time. We can't do that without technology. We can't do that without partners. So we are squarely focused on innovation, but centering that innovation on equity and impact.
And I guess I want to end by just asking you about the future. I mean, could we see flying cars delivering Marin County groceries to underserved communities one day?
We're open to that possibility, but we're focused on making sure that our neighbors who need us the most are getting the services they need. And whatever we can create to make that happen, we're all in.
Thank you so much for your time, Tanis.
Thank you.
And that ends today's event. Thank you all for joining for another illuminating conversation that made us all smarter, faster. And thank you to our sponsor, Cruise, for making today's event possible. We'll see you here soon, but until then, follow us at Axios.com or on the Axios app for the latest breaking news in tech, business, and beyond.